we have the presentation slides. Thank you for that. I see there's polls in place, and I'll be monitoring the Q&A as we go through, but I'm going to do the presentation and we'll answer your questions at the end. Okay, so this presentation is called Using Small Data to Improve Your Results Without Increasing Your Budget, Being Overwhelmed, or Collecting More Data. Now, if you've seen any of these things, if you've heard yourself say these or heard anybody in your team say this thing, these items, and it sounds familiar to you, then you are a candidate to be freed of the big data crunch and go after small data. So if your company doesn't care about data, if you're worried about all the different changes going on platforms, if you're not very technical, even if you are technical, I'm telling you and I'm giving you permission to not focus as nearly as much on every little detail and focus more on frameworks and strategies to guide you. It's time for you to start thinking small. Now, I developed this framework this year, but it was based on 10 plus years of working in data and teaching in a classroom, data and analytics particularly, because I've had thousands of students, tens of thousands of students go through my courses, and people generally have the same reservations, and that is all the techniques that they hear about, all the articles you read are about these leading edge companies, these companies that have huge analytics and data departments. And then you feel a little bit jealous that you're not able to implement that in your business, or you're not able to do that at your company. And this helps you frame it up to say, okay, well, maybe I don't need to be doing the techniques of $100 million companies. I can focus on the area of the size of my business, the size of my department, the size of the company I'm working for. And so if you're a small solo business just trying to make it, you don't need dashboards. You don't really need a lot of analytics. Your only analytics tool you really need is your bank account. Did this activity generate revenue? Did it generate sales? And so I call that a solo, because when you're a solo, you have one objective, and that's to make enough money that you can go micro. And we have micro, the next step, and that is, okay, you have a small team. This could be your entire team. It could be your marketing team, but basically you have 2 or 3 objectives that you're looking at: awareness, top of funnel, and leads or sales, bottom of the funnel. Then as your company grows and you get some success, you can see the different revenue range here. You could become agile. You're like, okay, well, that's cool. We had some success. Now let's start to figure out our full funnel. Let's figure out where we're leaking people, where we need to improve our processes, where we need to get more by doing the same amount of effort. How do we get our awareness to work even more for us? And that's where the agiles come in, and you have a little bit bigger team, and you have a focus on the full funnel of marketing. Then we get into leveraged, which is when you start to hire the consultants. When you start to hire, I mean, I've been a consultant in data and analytics on and off for over 15 years now. And that's when you start to hire people like me, because I'm a specialist and we work on things. Or you hire a team of specialists, you get a data science team, you get all these different things in place. You have multiple funnels, you have parallel objectives. That's really a lot of people, a lot of the bigger companies, a lot of the companies that are successful start to go into this area. And that's where they can benefit from some of these advanced articles and these advanced trainings and these AI platforms, these big data platforms, right? And then the leading edge, that's really when big data becomes a strength. That's really when big data is a big, important piece. So whenever I say small data, this is what I want you to keep in mind, is that not everybody needs to worry about things at their phase that they're at, or the size of company you're at, the size of department you're at. And if that makes you feel better, just know that, yeah, not everybody needs to do these things. And in fact, I don't do all the leading edge techniques for my own company because it's not even big enough to get to that point. Now, at the end, I'm going to give you a resource. This will be my secret number 3 that I'm going to share, is this thing called the ACEs template. So make sure you stick around. I think you're going to stick around, but if you were thinking about signing off or doing something, this is a reason to stick around, because there will be a link embedded in at the end of my presentation. And this tool gives you an ROI predictor, clarity in the data you want to collect, and a clear strategy and framework for proceeding forward. And that's why you want to listen to that. Okay, so I'm Jeff. And here's a few things about me. I'm one of the few online teachers who also teaches at a university. I teach at a university in Minnesota. If any of you are from the US and you notice, I am from Minnesota. So everything on here says Minnesota. Didn't intend to be that way, but it ended up being a Minnesota love fest for this presentation. So I'm just running with it, even though my beloved twins are no longer in contention. I've been in digital for 17 years, and I've won a lot of different awards. Not that that really matters here. I consider myself an expert in everything from data science and analysis to online ads to digital marketing strategy to tag management. And I've taught this in 20 plus countries and online to millions of viewers. Okay, so that's a little bit about me. And at Data Driven, which is my company, we've had over 51,000 people on our platform learning from me, taking my courses. A little bit more about me. This is me. This is where I've been between the years 2015 and 2019. This is where I went around the world. And I have been to Istanbul. It's one of my favorite cities, and I can't wait to go back. It's not on here because I didn't go there on this particular trip. But now I have a different priority in life, and that is that I'm a dad, and I have a 2-year-old son named Jack. Along with my wife, we are raising an active boy. Now, what would you choose when you only have a limited amount of time? I said already, we don't have enough time in the day. You don't have enough time in the day. Would you rather do manual data entry, or would you rather go out there and have that done for you automatically and then go visit Hobbiton in New Zealand? Would you rather choose to code event tracking manually, or would you have fun at the playground and automate that piece? More data? Nobody's got time for more data, okay? Jack says that. Now, it took me a long time to figure that out. I made a lot of mistakes along the way with data. I made a lot of mistakes along the way with fashion. I actually wore this outfit in public one time. I regret it immensely. I don't even want to keep that on the screen. But I've also gotten a lot of things right when it comes to data. For example, I've been able to manage successfully and generate over $20 million or over 1 million leads and conversions for my clients and spend over $20 million just on the Google Ads platform alone. Now, after doing this for these 17 years, here's what I've learned. You don't need more data than you have right now. You don't need any more data. Now, you might need the right data, but you don't need more. You can turn data into a strength and an asset for your business if you follow the methods I'm going to show you. And you can develop a data-driven marketing strategy if you use the right framework. And it all comes down to 3 secrets to using small data to double or increase your marketing results. Secret number 1. Well, it starts with a myth. And the myth is that more data is the right answer. Big data is better than small data. That's a myth. And the secret is that more data won't get you better results, but the right data will. So it's not about more, it's about more focus. Secret number 2, which is led by myth number 2. Myth number 2 is that data platforms are there looking out for you and they want to do the best that they can for you. Well, the secret is that you don't need, or that you do need to understand the data platforms before you can leverage them, but leverage is all about you, not about the platform itself. Google Analytics is just a tool. Google Analytics is the same tool for a 10 visitor cat blog as it is for a 100 million visitor e-commerce store. They get the same Google Analytics for the most part. There's some rate limits and some other stuff that goes into the premium Google Analytics, but basically it's the same interface. And then myth number 3, which leads to secret number 3, is that you just need to do this on your own. And if you just work harder, it's going to suddenly make sense. The truth is, the secret is that even professionals use proven frameworks to guide them. And in fact, the people you admire around data, the people who are successful, very rarely are they reinventing the wheel. They're just choosing successful frameworks and molding them to their organization in order to have clarity in what they're doing, in order to have focus in their efforts. And this is the reason why I'm giving you my framework at the end of this. You can just hop right on that link once I share it, and you can have the framework that I'm going to talk about in secret number 3. Okay, so secret number 1, more data won't get you results, but the right data will. Here's the deal. You're collecting too much data. And I'm not just talking about from a opinion perspective. Legally, in many countries, and even the state of California, collecting too much data is not something you can even do. It's illegal to collect too much data or to collect the wrong data. And so when people are taking notice that, you know, at first the idea was data is cheap, just collect as much of it as you can, especially when it's cheap or free with Google Analytics or any other tool that's out there that gives a free version. It turns out that there is a cost of free, and it is either privacy or it is law, right? Depending on how quickly that's been adopted. So either you're violating the privacy of your users and they don't know about it, or there's a data breach, or you're breaking the law because a government has proactively said that. And so pretty much a fact that you're collecting too much data, no matter where you are on the small data spectrum. Now, I'm guilty of this. I've been guilty of this many times. Here's an example of me collecting too much data. Here's some dashboards that I built when I was a one-person company called Jeffalytics, and eventually turned into a multi-person company called Data Driven. I had dashboards that looked like this. Crazy, isn't it? I was like, yeah, I need all this stuff because I was doing it for my leveraged clients. I was doing it for my leading edge clients. So I thought I had to do it for myself as I go out there and do this. And what ended up happening is we'd build these dashboards, or I would build them, and I had some people working with me over time. And then I would never look at them again. We'd never look at them again because, as you can imagine, this is a pain to update. It's a lot of work. And so creating this great strategy when you're a really small organization just doesn't make sense. And so I started to think, okay, well, if I'm solo, I need to get enough sales in order to go to the next level, which is to go to micro. And that's where small data really came in. And that's the journey that I think every business goes through, especially their online component, when you think about it that way. So solo, you got to start out solo. And a lot of you, just so you know, a lot of companies, you're coming in as like the 100th employee, then you're probably not at a solo part, right? But if you're in a small company or in a small department, that's maybe how it starts. Then we get into micro, which is where you start to expand your team and have specialties and have different functions. You start to expand your objectives as well. Agile. You grow the full team out there and you start to think about things from a full funnel perspective. Where do I need to pay attention? What do I need to pay attention to in order to get results over and over again? Leveraged. How do I leverage specialists and specialties in order to get an even bigger edge? And then finally, leading edge. So that's, again, the small data framework. And if you're wondering, what should you be paying attention to? You fit into one of these. If you work for a company or you own your own company, you fit into one of these 5 pillars, and this helps you frame up what you should be focusing on. Now, I assume there's going to be some questions in the Q&A about this, and feel free to ask them, and I'd like to hear what you think about it. But for now, I want to move on to how you can put small data in place. And so this is an example of Mike, who was one of my students in the classroom, and he basically took a template I gave him, a small data style template, just filled in the blanks, and he was able to float it up the pole and get in front of his organization and make an impact. So this is a company that would be in the leveraged area. This is a company that has over 1,000 employees and pretty well known in the state of Minnesota, a local newspaper. And he was able to take this report and put it out up the chain and get it sent to the CEO of the entire company. And so what small data it does is it helps you understand where you need to be and what you can focus on and how you can do more with less. This template, basically, you just fill in the blanks. You put in your numbers, you put in your observations, and then that's it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You're using a proven framework. This is a template that I've had available on my site for the last 8 years, and tens of thousands of people have downloaded it. And so if you're ever having to run a report, or you want to say, what's a small data way to give somebody a monthly presentation, you can check it out on our site, datadrivenyou.com, monthly report template. But I don't want to I want to keep us going. And that leads me to secret number 2. You need to understand data platforms before you can leverage them. Now, here's an example of a lever and how a lever works. So you have a very large rock that you want to lift. That's on the left-hand side, a huge rock. Now, if you wanted to just lift a rock up, it's impossible. Even if you're like the biggest, even if you're Halfor Bjornsson, who is the world's strongest man, many times the mountain from Game of Thrones, you wouldn't be able to lift up a rock. Now, what if we called that rock expectations around marketing? This guy can't lift up the biggest rock in the world without some kind of leverage, okay? So what leverage works is that just knowing that you can't pick it up yourself, you want to have something that makes it easier. So you can still put forth the effort, but you need a fulcrum, which is something that is in the, that gives you leverage in order to lift up and to meet expectations. And in the case of marketing, in the case of delivering on small data promises and delivering on analytics, it's that you want to have a deep understanding of digital marketing and data platforms if you want to succeed. You need to have this really good understanding of how the platforms work. Now, here's an example from a potential client. So I worked with a client, or a client that I was trying to pitch. I had a client, we were in their boardroom pitching them on analytics services and managing their paid media services. And they're like, well, we already are pretty comfortable with our media agency. They're buying us ads all over the internet, and it seems like they're doing okay. Well, during that time in this boardroom, I started to look at their analytics. I started to look at what was actually happening from the media they were buying. And I learned that they were only getting a handful of sales from all the money they spent. So they spent over $600,000 in ads, and they made about, well, I told them they made 15, and they thought that meant, $15,000 or $15,000 or something like that in revenue, but it was 15 total sales. So they only made a little bit less than $1,000 in revenue from that $600,000 in spend. And what I realized at that time is that most people that are in marketing, they're focused on the wrong things. They think that they think that the most important thing to do is to put out media messaging. They think the most important thing to do is to trust the platforms that are out there, to trust Google ads, to trust banner ad vendor, to trust Facebook ads, to trust any one of these platforms that they're doing the right thing for them. But then once you peel back the onion, a lot of times they're not. And so you really need to have a great understanding of how these platforms work if you want to get the most success. So it's not just having a framework to follow, but also an idea as to what you can do. And so since then, I've taken on a very contrarian point of view as to the value of platforms. So I have like a Google Ads course, for example, and most Google Ads courses tell you what you can do on Google Ads. And I tell you instead, I tell you what you can do on Google Ads, but I tell you why you shouldn't trust Google's default opinions, because they're almost always self-serving. I tell you why you shouldn't trust Facebook ads, because they're self-serving. Why, if you leave things up to an algorithm, those algorithms aren't geared towards the maximization of your return on investment. They're maximized towards shareholder profits. And so I have a healthy distrust of a lot of these platforms, and I think you should too, and understand that even if you have the perfect data plan, if you put all your trust in a vendor who's accountable to their shareholders, a public company, you're probably not going to get very good results. And so you should always educate yourself on how to leverage these platforms, because that's a huge part of getting results and getting success, right? So you've seen me use the word leverage a few times. I use the word leverage here in secret number 2. I use it in small data as well. Now, a lot of times small businesses, very small businesses, 1 or 2 person departments, less than $1 million in revenue, they'll try running ads and they'll say it doesn't work and they'll give up. And the reason why is because they're not leveraged. They're basically trusting the platforms. But it doesn't just stop at small businesses. I've seen Fortune 500 US companies have the same problem. And this is the one here. And so we ended up winning the business by just showing them how you can do better and how you can use analytics and data to fill in the gaps instead of just trusting vendors out there. So they dropped the equivalent of 2 Lamborghinis to get $1,000 in sales. And I just don't think that should happen in this day and age. And it definitely shouldn't happen if you're leveraging your marketing results and leveraging the platforms instead of letting them leverage you. Now, far too many marketers, I've learned, are stuck in the past. Far too many marketers think that, hey, we'll just put something out there, trust people, and it will work. That's just not how it goes. Here's an example of leverage when you do it the right way. So this methodology from my own programs is the results we've received compared to typical advertisers. And so if you use leverage on platforms, especially advertising platforms, you can get 2 to 3x the results for the same amount of spend, or spend less and get even more results overall. And just the best place to learn online anything to leverage the Google data platforms is at Data Driven. It's a shameless plug. I won't keep it up there for very long, but it's datadrivenu.com. If you ever wanted to learn this, or if you want to know how to take a contrarian perspective as to the data and not trust the platforms, check it out on Data Driven. Okay, let's get to secret number 3, which is the grand finale. And that is that even professionals use proven frameworks to guide them. Now, I graduated from college in 2003, which is one of the worst job markets ever, one of the worst markets, market correction, let's say. And things were going pretty poorly for me until I met this guy, the guy on the right, who was Prince's bodyguard. His name is Hucky Austin. So Hucky, that's him. He was Prince's bodyguard for about 15 years. And he took me along to be a bodyguard at one of their bodyguard events because we created a website together called bodyguardcareers.com. Still exists, still out there online. So I was a bodyguard and I was trying to get into digital marketing. And what I learned was that I didn't know what I was doing and I needed some frameworks to get me there. And Hucky was the guy to say, hey, Jeff, you built this website. How do we get traffic to it? How do we measure what's happening? And back then, this is how we measured what was happening on our website. This is an example of our analytics tool. It was called AW Stats. I'm not sure if anybody remembers that, but AW Stats before Google Analytics was how you measured how the web was working. You measured it in hits, and that was it. You didn't really know. It was all server side, so it didn't have any filtering for bots or anything like that. And you just assumed or you just guessed as to what was happening. You'd look at this and you'd say, okay, well, we have visits from like a Google or Inktomi Slurp, which is Yahoo's indexing engine. And we have the Google engine, Google's crawler that we'd look at, and you'd see and guess as to whether or not you were going to rank in search engines or whether or not you were getting traffic. This is how it was back in the day. And it's important to see that when Google Analytics came out in 2005, I was one of the beta testers of it. This is how we actually finally got visual results to see how these platforms worked. It's a pretty big revolution for me as far as understanding and looking at how data works. And what I learned along the way there is that when something's working, you just double down on it, right? You need to understand. So Google had some data for us. I doubled down on it. But it made me realize that data alone, just data without anything going on, isn't really that useful. And you need to have something, you need to go further than that. What I want to talk about is just my relationship with data and why I think that small data is such an important distinction to make and why it's so good for us. So let's start with the definition of data. What exactly is data? Data is this. It is a series of facts. It's rows in a spreadsheet. It's cells or records in a database. It's basically this happened or didn't happen. It's any kind of facts that you collect. And so if you take a spreadsheet that says, this week I ate lunch 4 times, and then you make that into a spreadsheet every week, you put how many times you have lunch, you created data. It's facts. It's factual tabulation of something, but it's really not that helpful until you do some kind of analysis on top of it. So this is what, so when you think about it, it's like being like Chidi from The Good Place. It's basically, it's this thing where your brain is always crunching and analyzing and trying to make sense of data, and it can go a little bit crazy for you. If you look at data and you try to make sense of it, your brain's going to make that sound like a fork in a garbage disposal too, because data is just the beginning. Data is not the end all be all. It's just a phase that we go through. It's the first phase. What's more useful than that? Information. Information is when you take data and you add context to it. So that's that row of spreadsheets you put in there, you put some kind of context to it. You put some kind of analysis on top of it, and you start to make sense of it. Okay, well, having lunch 4 times this week or 7 times this week, whatever it is, now that I add context to it, like something like whether or not you gained or lost weight, whether, any biometric measurements, all those things, and then qualifying them to say, this is the result of this, that is creating information from that data. That is analysis that goes into it. But you can go much further than that, right? Information is just categorization of raw facts. Knowledge is when you start to connect the dots. That's the really cool part, when you start to connect the dots between everything that's happening. This is connected to that. This is not connected to that. This data is not really that important, even though it looks important in a spreadsheet. These things work. Correlation, causation. Correlation does not equal causation. Correlation does equal causation. Those are some things you can look at with knowledge once you start to connect the dots with the data you collect. Insight is knowing when you should double down on something that's working. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't use data to inform your decisions, the insights are usually based only on experience. The insights are usually based on the past, which has some value, right? Data is also based on the past, but when you use it based on somebody's opinion or somebody's experience, it's very specific to a situation. It doesn't mean that it's always going to work over and over again. When you inform it based on data, the insights, it's going to be a lot stickier and a lot more reasonable and a lot more effective to go on it. And that's when you want to start to double down, is insights from the data you collect. This is when in Swingers, this is when we double down on insights. Then finally, we have wisdom, which is following a proven path. Wisdom is saying, okay, we've done enough experimentation. We've tried enough things. This is our path to success. This is where we need to go. This is the path to get there, from point A to point B to point C to D. Okay, that's where you get in and you say, okay, well, you know what? This is the proven path. This is what needs to happen. And And this is what I mean by frameworks. This is what I'm getting at when I say frameworks are important, because frameworks are a proven path. There may be somebody else's proven path. Maybe you take a framework off the shelf, you take somebody's idea, and then you make it into your proven path. But frameworks are the way that we make sense of the world. Now, I've gone all over the world speaking and talking about this and data and so on and so forth. And frameworks are definitely the piece that really stick and measure home. Okay. And so in one of my talks or at the university, in the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, I had this observation, and that is that most people that were coming into my classes, they said they wanted me to teach them data or analytics, but what they really needed to know, what they really needed to focus on was understanding a framework for how to use and leverage the data they collect in order to make way more sense of the world. And so I wrote this down. This is in 2018 about a 2019 plan. I wrote down on the whiteboard at the classroom in Minneapolis, ACEs. It's like, okay, well, what is this? It's basically a framework for the goals and the objectives of a marketing organization framed up as far as their objectives. And so the bottom we'll start with, and that is sales. That's everybody needs to worry about that or think about that. Everybody needs to have some kind of either sale or lead goal, right? So the bottom is sales or leads. Everybody needs awareness, right? Everybody needs to have some kind of awareness situation in there as well. Then we have the capturing and the educating. So awareness is obviously top of funnel, impressions, views, even sessions, people coming to your site. Capture is when you understand their intent. That can be putting them onto a remarketing list. That can be capturing their email address. It can be it's giving you permission to market to them again, either implicit or explicit. Emails are explicit. Remarketing is implicit. Then you want to educate them. You want to turn them into somebody who is barely or acutely aware of you. You want to educate them either through email or ads or through whatever other channel you can get in front of them to know that you are the right solution so that when they're ready to buy, when they become a buyer, you are there for them. So this is very similar to AIDA, awareness, interest, desire, action. It's just a little bit modern and an online version of it. We call it ACEs. And that's the template that I'm going to provide to you in just a few minutes here. Okay, so ACEs is all about creating the wisdom of your organization. It's basically showing you the way that you measure your full funnel and all of your objectives for your website in one handy to use template. Now, I've been doing this for a long time. Like I said, I've done it in the classroom, and this is developed in the classroom. So one of my students, Courtney, what ended up happening was she took my class thinking that she didn't know anything about data and that she needed to know everything about the platforms. And it turns out she knew more about it than she thought. And I think that a lot of you know more about it than you think, but you think that there's always something new that you're missing out on, or there's information that needs to be brought to the table, or that some platform or some tactic is going to solve all your problems. But what you probably need is a framework. What you probably need is a line of thinking to think about, okay, well, how do we go about solving this problem? How do we go about defining what we need to do? Because when you have a framework to guide you, like this template, like ACEs, what it allows you to do is to focus a lot less on saying, well, do I need to use Google Analytics or Yandex Metrica? Do I need to use Google Ads or Facebook ads? It really makes you think about it in terms of objectives. It really makes you think about it in terms of what I call big M marketing, creating a big market out there, for your product or service, thinking about it from a overall holistic perspective, a big picture perspective, and then saying, okay, well, if I want more people to buy my product or service, then they need to be aware of me. I need to let them know. They need to tell me that they're interested, or I need to be able to capture that intent. I need to get them to know that I'm the best solution out there through some kind of education sequence, whether that's an email drip campaign or ads, continuous ads going out there. Even television commercials happen to be a way to educate and nurture somebody about what happens. When you see a television commercial, that's usually starts out at awareness, and then it keeps on reiterating that message as to here's what we are, here's how we educate, or you educate and nurture them as to what you do. And then eventually down the line, or for some people, it's the only thing you really focus on, it's sales and leads, getting them to become a customer for the first time and then a repeated customer over and over again. And so when you combine this area, basically those are the main objectives that any marketing organization needs in order to be successful. And if you can say, okay, well, that's pretty interesting. Now, for the size of my team, I really only need to worry about one objective, or I need to worry about all these objectives. I need to worry about 2 or 3. Well, the ACEs framework allows you to choose what you want to focus on based on where you're at in the small data spectrum. And so that's something that I'm giving away to you in just a minute here. So just to reiterate the 3 secrets of using small data. 1, more data won't get you results, but the right data will. And that's where we talked about focusing on, basically focusing on not collecting everything under the sun, but looking at more at the small data based on the size of your organization. Number 2, you need to understand data platforms before you can leverage them. That's where you educate yourself as to what a platform can do and what it can't do, and take a maybe contrarian perspective and say, okay, well, even though this platform is, they're giving me education, they're giving me all these bidding strategies, they're telling me that everything's great, I'm going to look at this thing and say, how do I leverage it best for my organization, not for their organization? And then number 3, even professionals use proven frameworks to guide them. Okay, even professionals are using proven frameworks, and that is, generally speaking, if you're not sure if you know enough, if you're not sure if you're effective, if you're always looking out there watching YouTube videos, taking courses, in order to figure out if you're missing a technique, chances are you're probably not missing out on a technique. Chances are you need a framework to take the techniques you know and give you permission to focus on doing fewer things. And that's really what small data is all about, doing fewer things so you can be better at the things you choose to bite off and go after. So thank you for your time, and I'll answer your questions. And if you go to datadrivenu.com/aceszone for Digitalzone, then you will have that template that you can download and use it. And if you have any questions, just reply to the email that delivers that to you, and I'll be happy to answer them for you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the great insights and for the last 3 tips. It was very nice to watch your presentation.